One day on from the latest horror on the railways, Railtrack has admitted that the condition of one of the rails in the area was, their words, not good. The feeling is strengthening all the time that the crash which killed 4 people and injured over 30 was caused by a broken rail. Tonight, the board of the company is considering the offer of resignation from its chief executive. He was, he said, distraught at the crash. But the deeper question is bigger than one man or indeed one company. David Lomax reports.
After 3 fatal accidents in barely 3 years, Railtrack is now facing increasing pressure for immediately improved safety standards. The structure of the entire industry is being scrutinised for ways in which reforms could bring results. Today, at the site of the Hatfield derailment, the urgency was underlined again by the discovery of a broken rail and by Railtrack's admission that the state of the track was, in their words, not good. There have been questions too about the maintenance which was supposed to have been carried out on this particular section. The cause of the crash is still not certain, but Mr. Vic Coleman of the Railway Inspectorate said he hoped to make an interim report public by the end of the week. And he emphasised his long-standing concern about the numbers of broken rails.
There are still far too many broken rails occurring on the network, and we have been working with this, with the Office of the Rail Regulator, with Tom Windsor, the Rail Regulator, because we have both had concerns in this area, and indeed we have sponsored some joint work together in looking at problems associated with broken rails. So it's a matter of record that both the regulator and myself are concerned about this matter.
Tonight in London, a special board meeting of Railtrack considered a resignation offer from its chief executive, Gerald Corbett. Among those who've spoken in his support today elsewhere was one of the victims of the Paddington crash.
For a chief executive to resign at a particularly horrendous time such as this, and a new person to come in, we fail to see how that achieves anything. Therefore, we would urge Railtrack not to accept Gerald Corbett's resignation.
But there were others today who welcomed the prospect of Mr. Corbett's departure, if only as a sign of the urgency of the problem of reforming safety procedures.
The fact that he is prepared to accept responsibility when things go wrong mean that whoever comes after him will understand that for the general public, safety comes first.
Although there have been attempts to separate them, Railtrack still has joint responsibility for safety and for ensuring that the company makes a profit. And there's another problem, the possibility that the complexity of the present structure itself is contributing to the difficulties of improving safety. This is the structure into which Britain's privatised railway system has evolved. At the centre are 25 train operating companies. Above them is the shadow Strategic Rail Authority, which controls franchise agreements. This in turn liaises with the rail passenger committees and council, which are sponsored by the regulator and monitor performance. The regulator controls the licences of the operating companies and Railtrack. Railtrack charges the companies for using its tracks. The train companies are also answerable to the 7 passenger transport executives. These are funded by the Department of Environment Transport in the regions, which set the objectives for the shadow Strategic Rail Authority. Earlier this year, it was this sort of complexity which was identified by the head of the inquiry into the fatal Southall crash as a contributory factor.
There are also, arising out of fragmentation, real problems with safety equipment in which 2 or 3 companies have different interests. There are no rules or procedures arising out of privatisation that govern the relations between companies, and I've recommended that that all be looked into.
But the lobbying group for the rail industry does not accept that privatisation or the complexity of the resulting structure has had any impact on safety.
I don't think that the system itself is failing to concentrate on the real issues. And let's bear in mind that the regulatory bodies include the Railway Inspectorate, which has been doing its job for 150 years. So it's not as if safety suddenly has walked on the stage in the railway industry. The safety standards and rules have been around a long time. Before companies are allowed to operate at all, they have to present a safety case to the regulatory bodies.
It's widely accepted in the industry that more modern equipment would improve safety. Recently, the operating companies invested in new trains. but Railtrack hasn't the staff or investment to give these the necessary safety clearances. There are now more than 1,000 new trains mothballed in sidings or parked on rented MOD land. The operating companies have been forced to carry on using old stock. Some carriages still in use are now more than 40 years old.
The trains are still safe, but the problem is that the older a train becomes, the more liable it is to failure. And of course, unreliability, delays, all this goes against the modern railway, where we're expecting modern efficient trains to run smoothly.
Since the Hatfield crash, many in the rail industry have gone out of their way to emphasise the comparative safety of rail when compared with road travel. But after 3 fatal accidents in barely 3 years, there's an increasing demand now that safety standards and procedures must change. The government might be reminded of its conference pledge when in opposition, that privatisation would cause inevitable problems with safety and there'd be only one remedy.
Let me make it crystal clear to any privatisation of the railway system, which, whereon of our arrival of a Labour government, will be quickly and effectively dealt with the full support of the community and be returned to public ownership.
Today, however, it looks as if the government will have to meet concerns about safety within the current privatised system.
Well, I'm joined now by Vernon Hintz of the RMT Trade Union and Pam Warren of the Paddington Survivors Group. We don't know whether Mr. Corbett is his resignation is going to be accepted. Do you think the board should accept it?
Whether they do or not is irrespective, really. As far as we're concerned, I think it's the whole corporate structure, not of just Railtrack, but the whole of the industry that needs to be looked at as far as the responsibility for safety in the railways. Your programme so far has shown exactly that, the complications that we have.
Now, why do you think that Mr. Corbett shouldn't resign?
Because we'd seen him on television prior to meeting him a month and a bit ago, and the change in him was obvious. And whilst we were talking, he seemed to be genuinely upset by what we were having to cope with and how we're trying to come to terms with things. And we just got the impression that as a person, genuinely, he wants to make safety top priority and admitted to making mistakes in the past, but wants to put things right now.
I mean, a year on from the Paddington disaster, you have presumably encountered quite a lot of figures high up in the railway industry. How does it strike you?
Well, I agree with what Vince has said, is that it's very, very complicated. When you actually get into the nitty-gritty of it, it becomes almost impossible to follow all the threads through, which is wrong. There should be a direct line of responsibility, and it should be clear as to who's taking responsibility, especially on the safety issues.
You have you've obviously been impressed by Mr. Corbett. Have other figures in the industry impressed you?
Not particularly. We haven't met that many, as you suspect. We do have plans to meet with some of the train operating companies, the managing directors from those, and we will listen to them accordingly. But having said that, what we are desperate to do is, we've been saying now something would happen again, and unfortunately it has. We want to press on quickly to try and get changes started tomorrow if possible.
But the overall impression you get is one of lack of coordination.
Definitely lack of coordination. The will is there with some of them, or with some people that we've met. But again, they seem to be hitting so many obstructions they can't actually continue forward.
Do you have a clear idea of what sort of reorganisation ought to be countenanced, short of renationalisation, which there doesn't seem much prospect of?
There must be, from governmental level down, something saying, stop, let's look at this within the next 2 or 3 days and make some movement that will bring under control all the very many aspects that we've seen tonight already, and bring together the audit, the inspection, the cross-examination, the cross-talk between the companies, the engineering. There are well over 200 or 300 companies now, besides the contractors and the subcontractors, that it is nearly impossible to get communication going properly. So we do need some function that is completely divorced from the operating companies, from the engineering companies and from Railtrack.
Is the problem that you don't think the chains of command are clear enough?
they're certainly not clear enough, and I think that has been proved on many occasions. Railtrack themselves are saying that broken rails have gone up. They're saying vandalism has gone up and everything of that nature. But there is no command or chain of command, and this was one of the things that was proved over both Southall and, of course, Ladbroke Grove, as is coming out now, is that the communication, the command structure was just not there.
Do you have any idea of immediate short-term steps that could be taken?
Well, we came out in May with a 10-point plan. I mean, some of the simplest solutions, and this is looking at it very much from a layman and a general member of the public, but we would suggest that you don't have two trains on the same stretch of track. That would seem an obvious one, rather than having perhaps the system they've got of two signals in between trains. Maybe we need to make it three. I think the risks that are still being taken are unacceptable, and there are some short-term measures that could be done now to stop the incidents happening.
Can you travel by train yourself?
No. I've always said that ever since we've been researching and finding out what we have found out, if I had my time again, I would not have caught the train on the 5th of October last year.
Well, of course not, but of course, I mean, statistics show, do they not, that it's a much safer means of transport than most?
Yes, I mean, comparisons have been made with cars, and I think that's just completely wrong. When you have your own car, you are taking personal responsibility for your own safety. You buy the car that you're happy with the airbags, the side impact bags. You have those choices. When you get onto a public transport system such as the railways, that choice is taken out of your hands. You're putting your life into somebody else's hands, and that's what we're saying is wrong.
Okay, thank you both very much. We're going to talk now to the head of the Strategic Rail Authority, Sir Alistair Morton. Do you agree that the present organisation is impenetrable in places?
Not entirely, no. I think it's complex. I think it does not deserve to be thrown aside and into the bin and start again, because that will create a convulsion that will just create total confusion and loss of responsibility in all directions.
The difficulty is that the Deputy Prime Minister appeared to acknowledge that the whole thing was a mess when he invented you.
That was what he did, to try and apply pressures where pressures could usefully be applied to the present structure. One has the famous saying, "We are where we are." It became the motto of building a Channel tunnel. You have to go on from where you are. The fact is, this structure, in my opinion, can be made to work. There is going to be some simplification of your famous diagram when we become legal at the passage of the coming act. It's a relief. It makes life simpler. But the important thing, I think, on which attention is focusing is the organisation of safety regulation. I'd like to make one point that I'm sure everybody will agree with. Every employer, every industrial enterprise is responsible for the safety of all people working on or visiting its premises. Full stop, end of message. Doesn't matter whether it's ICI, Railtrack or anyone. What we're talking about, in other words, is the supervision of safety, not the management of safety. Safety has to be managed. There's no such thing as total safety in transport. Your risks have to be managed. They have to be managed by the operators, including Railtrack.
But in the end, who is in charge? That's the problem that we have
The
here.
person who's responsible is the employer whose site it is.
But
That is Railtrack, if you're on the premises of Railtrack.
You run something called the Strategic Rail Authority. Presumably, number one in your strategic objectives is a safe railway.
Correct.
So, in a way, the buck stops with you.
You could say that, except that we are not the safety specialists. Take over to
Well, you see,
aviation.
this is the problem.
Yes, I understand you. If you look over to aviation, which a lot of people are doing at the moment, and there's merit in doing it, you have an economic regulator who is also a safety regulator. Now, that would be an argument for bringing safety regulation into the SRA, which is the principal economic regulator. It's not the competition regulator, it's the economic regulator, I'm sorry. The alternative argument is to have a safety regulation body for rail, which is not at the moment in existence, which I suspect perhaps is quite likely to be Lord Cullen's recommendation.
Yeah, something like the Civil Aviation Authority.
Something towards that, but a safety regulation authority.
But that could be, we could be waiting another 6 months for that.
But this is the mechanism that the public wanted. This is the blame culture. We want a public inquiry that will take, I'm afraid, once the lawyers are involved, up to 2 years, and will result in a load of recommendations that then may require legislation to enact, to put in place. So we could be talking about 3 years.
When you look at this confusing picture in which responsibility appears to go all over the place, do you agree with the conclusion of Professor Arf at the Southall inquiry, which was that it was the consequence of privatisation?
That a lot of the non-communication was seen by him to be the consequence of privatisation is beyond doubt. He said that.
The effect of privatisation is to leave no one in the driving seat.
Well, I'm not sure which driving seat you referred to, so I won't...
Well, there's only one driving seat, isn't it? When you're devising a rail strategy, presumably, as you've already conceded, the one overriding strategic objective is a safe railway.
Yes.
You currently have that charge, but then there are 3 separate organisations responsible for enforcing safety on the railways. It just needs to be slimmed down, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And this is what I believe will be the outcome of Cullen. Now, what at the moment is inconvenient, and to my mind is causing a delay I would rather not have, is the fact that everybody is undertaken to wait for Lord Cullen's recommendations. The parking of Railtrack's Safety, Supervision and Standards Department in a separate subsidiary with an independent chairman and a whole load of non-executive directors from outside is a parking place pending Cullen, and it must be understood so.
Okay, thank you all very much.